As my screen says, my name is Amanda Benton. I'm the Assistant Director of Alumni Relations at Marist. I'm also co-chair of the LGBTQ subcommittee of the Diversity Council, along with Melissa. And we're hosting this event tonight in coordination with the Hudson Valley LGBTQ Center. And really excited to bring everyone here together, and obviously want to thank them and other members of the subcommittee at Marist for their work in helping us put it together. We're very excited, as I said, to bring the 4 panelists together today to talk about their experiences throughout the pandemic, offer some advice, and answer some questions. Please note that today's event is being recorded and will be made available to students and alumni, as well as members of the LGBTQ Center who are unable to attend tonight. Due to the number of participants, you were muted on your way in. We ask that you leave yourselves on mute for the duration of the panel unless you're asking a question. If you want to ask a question, you can raise your hand. You can do that, physically in the screen space. I should be able to see you, or there is a raise hand option through Zoom. You can also type questions directly into the chat, either for everyone to see, or you can send them directly to me and I will relay them for you. So before we begin, I'm going to pass it over to Amanda Norton, the Director of Programs and Services for a land acknowledgement.
Thanks, Amanda. Hi, everyone. I'm also Amanda. I use she and they pronouns. And again, I work at the Hudson Valley LGBTQ+ Community Center. So just before we start with our event, I just want to take a moment to do a land acknowledgement to offer respect and appreciation to the Native people whose territories we reside on and whose land was stolen through colonization. Being a virtual event, it's quite possible we're all on different areas. We're all coming from different areas on different Indigenous land. Currently being in Kingston, New York, and where the Hudson Valley LGBTQ+ Community Center is, we're on Munsee Lenape land. And if you're unsure of Native territory that you are currently residing on, I'm actually going to put a link right now in the chat. And hopefully everyone got that. If you click on that link, there'll be a little search bar on the left-hand side where you can put in your own zip code or town. Click on it and it'll tell you the territory that you're currently residing on. So feel free to take a second just to do that, and you can drop it right in the chat. Feel free to leave your name, your pronouns, and the current territory that you are from wherever you are calling in from today. I'll start us off.
Hi, everyone. My name is Melissa Lulay. I'm going to introduce the speakers in just a moment, but please continue typing in the chat as I am doing so. As Amanda said, I'm Melissa. I'm the Assistant Director of First Year Programs and Leadership Development at Marist and the co-chair of the LGBTQ subcommittee of the Diversity Council. And it's my pleasure to introduce to you tonight's panelists. Frezia Martinez is a complex director at SUNY New Paltz and a co-instructor of Rivera House, the campus's LGBTQ+ living learning community. She also serves as the campus's trans athlete participation committee. This past year, she has worked to support on-campus LGBTQ+ individuals navigate various aspects of the pandemic, including feelings of isolation, lack of social interactions, or lack of support at home, as well as navigating her own mental health and emotions as a member of the LGBTQ+ community. Next, we have S.J. Langer, who is a writer and psychotherapist in New York City, where he maintains a private practice. Along with psychotherapy, he provides clinical supervision and mentorship, and is on the faculty at School of Visual Arts in both the MPS Art Therapy and Humanities and Sciences departments. His research team studies embodiment and trans phantoms. He is also involved in collaborations on interdisciplinary teams working on gender embodiment scales. One of his articles, Trans Bodies and the Failure of Mirrors, was the co-winner of the Simons Prize from Studies in Gender and Sexuality, and his first book, Theorizing Transgender Identity for Clinical Practice, a New Model for Understanding Gender, was a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award in 2020. Next is John Bennett, The Director of Certified Community Behavioral Health Services at Access Supports for Living, a Certified Community Behavioral Health Clinic grant recipient. Mr. Bennett oversees the delivery of services in the Hudson Valley, including outpatient counseling centers, PROS programs, mobile mental health teams, behavioral health urgent care centers, home and community-based services, and a first episode psychosis program. Before coming to Access, he was the Director of Mental Health at Callan Lord Community Health Center and a Regional Director of Psychosocial Services at the Institute for Family Health. He also sings bass in several community choirs. And our final panelist is James Baptiste, who grew up in Jamaica, Queens, and identifies as trans masculine non-binary. James has his undergraduate degree in sociology with a concentration in human services. He was obtaining his master's of social work before changing his mind and will now be attending SUNY New Paltz for a Master of Science in Humanistic and Multicultural Education. Besides being a student, he's also a proud dog dad. He has a 2-year-old Chihuahua and a 3-year-old Schnoodle. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Amanda.
Thanks, Melissa, and thank you also to the other Amanda. I'm going to get us started with a few questions for our panelists. Some of them came in with registration. And just as a reminder, we want this to be interactive. So we encourage you all to ask questions or even provide additional responses to the questions of others. So you can use the chat or raise your hand if you want to speak out loud. For the panelists, just to get us started, can you just give us a brief insight into your last year and a half? How has your job or life been impacted by this global pandemic? John, do you want to get us started?
Sure. Well, first I want to say I'm really happy to be in such great company. And I actually want to say hi to SJ. I don't know if you remember me, but I remember you from the city, from It Feels Like Another Life. Hi, nice to see you. Oh my God, over the last 10, 11, no, it's not even that. It's more like 14, 15 months. I can say professionally, we went from serving about 5,000 people in person, and within a matter of 3 days, went to serving 5,000 people, probably even more, in completely over the internet. And we thought before, for years, we had said, oh, we're going to do telehealth. We want to roll this out. This is going to be great. The Hudson Valley is pretty big. Why should somebody have to drive from Margaretville to come see us? And and we never did it. We never made it work. And then in 3 days, somehow we figured out how to make it work. And I have really great coworkers who donated essentially their part of their lives to make this happen, part of their home, their own equipment. People were very generous, worked all kinds of extra hours. And for the first month or two, everything was humming and buzzing, and it was scary, but we felt really engaged. And then over the last year, it's been this curve, it was kind of slowly downward, helpers burning out. I think I'm on that trajectory too. I'm starting to see that it's coming back up, although there have been so many false alarms through this that we're going to be back in person. We're all going to be living our lives like we used to. Oh, well, that'll probably be in July. No, maybe it'll be in September, maybe in 2021. But I am holding my breath, I think, for next fall to see what happens. But in terms of the people that we serve, and in terms of especially the LGBTQ people among the people that we serve, I think the biggest concern has been isolation, and I think that that we try really hard. We actually do more frequent sessions with people now that we can do it over the internet, but we're all suffering from fatigue, and I think our community is especially vulnerable to that kind of fatigue, because we're a community that has chosen a family for ourselves. We've chosen a network for ourselves, and for so many other people who are not LGBTQ, that all kind of fell in place, and they may be living with those people. But for us, it's always been an effort to make community. I don't want to say too much and move on to too many of the other questions, but that's kind of the bird's eye view of what it looks like where I am professionally.
Thank you. Frezia, you want to go next?
Sure. So in terms of the college front and residence life, so much has changed. I mean, increased responsibilities. Half my job is something that I would have never thought I would be doing before. Like the nature of my job changed from, because now we're responsible for, making sure like students have like safe, secure housing, but with, COVID, we also have to provide like isolation and quarantine spaces for them. And that also falls on us to give them meals, make sure that they're okay, and provide like a first line of like mental health, like, how you doing? Because you have to spend 10 days by yourself in like a bare room, and it's not the ideal situation to be in, because we also don't have the staff to provide you with a higher level of support that, students do deserve. But then, half the staff is also burnt out as well, because we're doing something that's completely unprecedented. And, we all had to pivot to kind of a remote hybrid model. And we're so used to, having these face-to-face interactions with students that we're like, how's this going to work? Information's changing daily from, like SUNY wide, and then like from, the health department and things. So it's just really been survival mode, really, is the best way to describe it. So it's just been, what do we need to do to get through, like to help everybody kind of stay afloat? And then everything else, unfortunately, right now is extra. So a lot of parts of my job that I really enjoyed doing, that like had those, fostering connections with other people. I had to kind of put that aside because I needed to focus on things that we needed to get through with the job. And then I also found myself on a more personal level being on more of a survival mode as well. Like, I have to work because I gotta live and I need money, but like, what else do I need to get myself through the day, get myself through this pandemic? And it's eased up a little bit, but it's still very much like that because we're still in the midst of it. I am really happy though with like how like I feel really privileged and fortunate to work with a school that really did take the pandemic like very seriously and really like encourage students to stay safe. And like we really like kind of made sure to hold students accountable for their actions and really educate them about, like safety and masks and social distancing and things like that. So that, we weren't seeing, a large amount of gatherings that, did end up like closing campuses, like unfortunately so many other campuses like have experienced, so I do feel grateful for that, and surprised as well. Like I didn't know college students could be that way a little bit. So yeah, it's been really survival mode, really is the way to describe it.
Thank you. SJ?
Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for having me, and hi John. So yeah, I mean, overnight, pretty much, I had to start seeing patients online, which is something I only ever did as an emergency, and teaching and doing research all online and not seeing anyone at that point for the foreseeable future, and the uncertainty of how long that would be, which at least as a therapist, I would like to be consistent and bounded, and none of that was available. And I immediately felt the loss of, as someone who studies embodiment, the loss of embodiment in sessions with people, right? That you can't really tell if someone's even trying on Zoom. Right? That or so many things were lost in terms of being able to be connected with clients and students too. And another sort of unusual thing, especially being able to try to support people through this time, usually as the clinician, you're not going through the same exact trauma at the same exact time as your patient, right? Maybe you went through it at some other point in your life, right? But not usually concurrent. And so this is a very unique situation, I think, for probably most most people I know who are professionals working with folks, and also being a trauma specialist, really noticing how the isolation or the, not being connected or having to move really quickly, right? Like some people had to leave their apartment and go somewhere else in sort of a rushed way, which many of those things triggered old traumas that one wouldn't have initially thought were related, right? And then over time, how all these different sort of different aspects of all of the stressors that are mounting are affecting everybody in very unique and different ways, but are affecting everybody. So being able to sort of understand how individualized and how connected to people's past, the way that they're having difficulties through this, especially LGBT folks. So yeah, I'll let the next person go. We can get into the other questions later.
Thanks. And then James, you want to round us out?
So I was working at a school until February, but I was working at Head Start. So basically children who are all under 5 years old. So from newborns to pre-kindergartners. And it was really hard, especially since it happened like right at the end of the school year. So I remember, I think it was March 13th. We had no idea. We were at work that day. They were like, okay, we have to deep clean the building. So basically we're all just wiping down walls, wiping down windows, door handles, like anything anybody would touch. Teachers were in the classroom spraying the water and bleach on the toys and trying to clean everything and sanitize everything. And then by the end of the day, we were told that the school was actually going to close. We were told that it was going to be for 2 weeks. And then as we got closer and closer to the end of the 2 weeks, it became months. And then we weren't going to return until the fall at some point. And for me, the hardest part was trying to get in touch with my parents, because I was the caseworker basically, and a lot of them wouldn't answer the phone. So we were all kind of working from home, and that entailed just checking on the parents, dropping off like activities. But it became very stressful when parents wouldn't answer the phone, and you just have no idea what's going on with the family. You don't know if anybody's sick or anything like that. Thankfully, most of my families were okay. But then moving on, as we tried to enroll more students for this school year, we had like no applications. People did not want to apply, but I mean, it was for a variety of reasons, kind of just like the environment of that school. But one of the reasons also being COVID. And the hardest thing to ever see is watching children who want nothing but to play with one another and share toys and other things like that, then learning how that they have to be on different sides of the classroom, and separated, 3 students to a table. They were so used to sharing meals together, so served family style. They would have, main bowls, and then everybody would take their part from the food. So they went to bag lunches. They had to eat by themselves. And it was really hard because a lot of the children don't really understand what was going on for them. But, they're really resilient, and I watched them go from not understanding to then being like, okay, when I'm done playing with this toy, I have to put it in the sanitized bin, and then I have to, only take toys that nobody else was playing with. I have my own little bin. And it was really amazing to see how fast they were able to adapt. But yeah, I'm not there anymore, but yeah, I miss them a lot.
No, that's wonderful, and it's hard. Obviously, this pandemic has affected everyone, whether they're under the age of 5 or they're college students or they're adults. But as members of the LGBTQ community, what are some of the most pressing needs you've seen in the queer community, especially during the pandemic, that may be different or exacerbated, or even if they are the same as the rest of the population? What have you kind of seen? And I don't know if John unmuted himself, so I'm gonna let him go first.
Okay. I don't want to stop anybody if you really feel you have something you want to add right now. No, okay. I think I'm really seeing huge needs from the oldest people among us, and then also the newest people among us. And when I say new, I don't necessarily mean young, but I usually mean young. I mean people who are coming out, or people who are formulating identity that they're part of our community. And this has just been at times a train wreck for both of those groups of people. So I'll go with the older folks first. I think a lot of older folks in our community, unlike I think the community in general, tend to live alone. And this has been a terrifying time, especially before there was a vaccine, to know what high risk people 70 and older, for example, are at. And then there are needs that sometimes emerge. I'm thinking of I'm thinking of an older man that I've been in contact with recently, who during the course of the epidemic started out being very afraid of neighbors and very isolated, and then slowly started to develop dementia, started to develop symptoms of Alzheimer's, and was not only alone and afraid, but also then starting to be very challenged in terms of memory, starting to have some very frightening changes are happening. And it was all during a time when there weren't a lot of social services that were reaching out and willing to go into someone's home and assess them. So, this is an example of an older person in our community that this pandemic has made the time especially frightening for. In terms of the younger people, I can say that clinically we're seeing a lot of younger folks who are coming out or kind of solidifying an identity that they're part of our community, and then not having support. Then finding that their support is really just on the internet, knowing that there are other people they could be reaching out to who are almost right around the corner, but they don't have access to them right now. And it's on both sides. I think it's a similar process. There's loneliness. There's a real kind of developmental need for closeness and intervention from other people in our community. And it's a time that isn't fostering that, isn't allowing that. So that's what I'm seeing in terms of need right now. It's the need for connection. And I would add to that as well. And I guess it's a criticism of our community in general. We haven't gotten very good at crossing the intergenerational gap. Our older folks, our mentors, I think are a little hesitant to reach out to the younger people in our community, and the younger people in our community might not know how to engage with our elders. And so I think add to it the pandemic and the isolation that both of those extremes are feeling, and we've got a problem. And we need some creative solutions to that when we come out of our isolation. So those are my 2 cents about the needs of our community right now.
I mean, I could add to that. For sure, the ability to connect is, and the community isolation is extremely detrimental for folks. But particularly for trans and non-binary folks, especially over this year and particularly in the beginning of the pandemic, the complete halt of any kind of gender affirming surgeries for months. And one of my folks, she was supposed to have surgery in July, and luckily by July, surgery started again and actually didn't get pushed back. I don't know what they did with, the months of people who had been waiting over a year for that date, right? And then the mental health crises that come with that wait, and then disappointment and having to wait more, or even for being able to just get an assessment for hormones, or being able to do the follow-ups, or that it's more complicated now, and working with folks about balancing that difference between, or how to find the physical health versus the mental health, right? That like maybe it felt physically dangerous in early pandemic to go anywhere, or to go meet someone or to go for a medical appointment, but was it going to actually improve their mental health more than put them at risk? And not that I could tell them which one that was, but being able to, go through each side of that to know, what was going to be best for them, and that, that's a real pressing need to know. I think it's a little easier now since everyone can, get vaccinated if they want. So you're at, the fear is a lot lower. But the other aspect of that, because we've, most people have been pretty isolated for over this year, is that many folks who maybe socially transitioned or started their medical transition over this year, they haven't had the social experience of their gender. And so being able to support folks through that sort of, that things didn't sort of start to happen gradually. For some people, that was a relief. They're like, great, I'll, get sort of fully cooked and then I'll come out the other end the way, we did it in the 50s. But for a lot of folks, right, just getting used to that, how people interact with them, how they may want to or need to interact in their firm gender, right, that I think people need support around that I think, the versus gender brothers and sisters, might not think of that they would need support about.
So another question, this one actually came in ahead of time, is what advice, and I might have Frezia answer this first, but what advice do you have for someone who's living with a roommate, was a specific question, but it would also apply to family members or anyone else in a living community whom they're not out to, or I guess even in a worst case situation, who is actively non-supportive of their identity? Is there specific coping people they can go to kind of address those conversations?
Yeah, I think, also speaking as someone who, did live with like people, like particularly my parents, who were like not accepting and very homophobic, and I'm still not out to them, and that's like a conscious choice that I've made. I've had experience with that, but also, working at a school where some students don't get to choose their roommates, and I think those who have like the privilege and option of being able to be a part of the LGBTQ plus living learning community Rivera House, like have that like awesome privilege of rooming with students who at least are part of the community, whether or not they share similar identities or not, which provides, that automatic level of like safety and comfort. And, I feel like students who have the privilege of coming to college in general, like especially with New Paltz, because I could just speak to that as a workplace environment. I know that it's very like come as you are and very accepting of that, and students do feel comfortable like exploring their identities a little more, like even from like the fall and spring semester. A lot of students like just like we're like, nope, I identify by these pronouns now, or like this is now my chosen name, and everyone's like, awesome, great, let's go. So that was really great. But for those who, might not have had that experience, I think a lot of students are, and our culture also is very focused on this like coming out process, and that being like the gateway into being officially part of the community, or how there's less validity in not being out, or any kind of stigma in that sense. And I feel like my advice from my personal experience and what I've seen is that it's okay not to come out also, because we have to prioritize our own mental health, our own mental well-being, and our own safety above all. So if it's, not safe for someone to do so, like why? It's also, doesn't make someone any less valid in their own identity and with who they are. I think something that has also like helped as well is to just find support wherever they can. I see, even if it's through, social media and connecting with a lot of like LGBTQ plus creators and things like that, so that you're at least like exposed to like people from the community, or like seeing like, oh hey, they're like me, they share those same identities. Like that can be helpful in knowing that somewhere out there you're not alone. But I think also something that has helped me personally in my past is just having that support friend or support person who I can just like quickly like vent or, you know, talk to you and be like, hey, this happened, I'm really upset about it. And even though you might not be able to do anything at that time, or it might not be safe to you, it's nice to know that you have like that person there to connect with virtually. But it's basically just like finding support and just, you know, prioritizing your safety. I think students in college who are maybe facing those situations have a little bit more leeway in terms of like they can go tell a staff member, and we provide them with resources and connect them with people who can help them move them out of that room, get them out of that situation. You know, there's a lot more flexibility there in providing also like mental health support as well. But that's also reliant on the student to like communicate that with us, because we can't help them if we don't know, you know, what's going on. And that's where, you know, and supervising a staff of RAs, I really like impress upon them the importance, especially during the pandemic, where students could be like more isolated or perceived to be more isolated, to really like check in on their mental health and be that source of support, because you really never know. So
I would like to add to that as well. I appreciate you mentioning the safety aspect, because I feel like in social media and popular culture, we see so many people coming out and some families are really supportive. But then often I see people who are getting kicked out of their homes. And I think that the pressure kind of pushes people to think that that's what they have to do. And it's similar to when people are starting hormones and things like that. It becomes this thing of like, this is the next step. This is what I'm supposed to do in this process, is go on hormones now. But then it's dangerous. You know, they may not be living in an environment where if they start growing facial hair or start developing in other ways, that their family will accept them. And that can be even worse. And I actually saw something that I found kind of funny and wish I had taken that advice. But basically this person was like, if you know that your family is homophobic and they're fully supporting you, take advantage. Don't come out, just take advantage of them. You get whatever you need out of them, and then when you're ready, come out. And I think that that's kind of my advice, as unethical as it may be, as hard as it may be. But growing up, I did not have a very supportive family, and had I waited a little bit longer to come out, I definitely think I would have had a lot easier of a time. But again, I just want to go back to that whole safety aspect, because that's really the core of everything, is just like making sure you're safe. So yeah, thank you for that.
So my next question then is, we've talked a lot about mental health, and I know SJ and John, this is kind of like your field, but all of you can feel free to jump in on this. But what are, just personally, what are ways that you find to keep your mental health good, positive during these times and in general?
Is it okay if I go first? All right. So my mental health has been quite insane lately. I truthfully do not recall all of 2020. As far as I'm concerned, 2020 was 2019 times 2. And as for my mental health, my perception of time is so bad. And it has led to so many periods of disassociation where I truly cannot recall weeks at a time. And I struggled to have therapeutic services during quarantine, because I was living at home with a very narcissistic parent whom I would not be able to have sessions through Zoom. So it was basically several months without therapy, and just sending her a check-in email every once in a while. And so truly that coping really became for me just journaling every single day. Every single day I would just journal, and I would try my best to wake up ahead of time so that way I can go for a walk and spend that time by myself. I walked a lot, enough to have lost like 30 pounds or so, and just truly talking to people who I know have my best interests at heart. Again, as Frezia was saying, is just talking to your support system, because those were people I could, FaceTime and feel comfortable talking to, whereas like I wouldn't be able to really sit at home somewhere in the quiet talking for an hour with my therapist. So it took a lot of different types of coping mechanisms, and I'm talking about coloring, drawing, painting, taking walks, journaling. There are so many, just any single coping mechanism I could ever think about, I was using.
I think if I could just jump in here, I kind of like followed a similar train in that when lockdown first happened and like those first 2 weeks took place, I live alone, so like I was by myself. I saw people virtually. I was kind of like frozen in like, what do I do? And I kind of like hit like a mental like rock bottom, and I got to a point where like I don't even, it's all a blur. I don't even remember anymore. But I was like, I can't keep doing this because then I'm just gonna like spiral out of control. And so I started, you know, kind of focusing on myself, and I recognize that, you know, I had the privilege and the ability to be able to do this, but like to be able to just spend a lot of time like unlearning my like past behaviors and things I learned as a child that I still take with me that like affected my mental health at that moment. Like, for example, my parents really ingrained in me that if I wasn't being productive and if I wasn't you know, doing something and producing something, that I was inherently lazy and unvaluable. And, you know, that we always have to like push ourselves past the limit in order to prove something. And I recognize, you know, like that came from like my parents as immigrants and stuff. And that was a survival mechanism we had in order to make it in this country, but it no longer served me at that moment. And I needed to just pivot and teach myself that, you know, it's okay to do nothing. It's okay to relax. We're all like going through this collective trauma, and that there's value in just being and existing in who we are. And that really helped a lot and helped drive me to like explore new things. And now like hiking and being outside is my primary like go-to. Like if I'm not outside for at least like once a day, no matter how briefly, like I actually like feel it affecting me nowadays. So it's incredible like how in tune I feel like some of us have had the time to be, because we've had this like extra time to process, but recognizing also that not everybody has had that privilege. So
Yeah, I'll just add, because I think you two pretty much cover most everything. It feels like, but yes, I of course highly endorse therapy, and sometimes there's even access to free therapy. I know our school, a colleague of mine, started an art therapy group that was free for students, and she's still running it. Any kind of support group, there's been a lot of mutual aid support groups or 12-step support groups, if that's something that works for you. I'd say, yeah, get outdoors. Also meditation, right? You don't need any equipment for it. It is sometimes good to do it by yourself, so isolation is not necessarily a bad thing, and can really, I think, improve one's ability to know like that, you know, things, you know, are happening to you, but that's not also who you are, right? And that you're, you know, you exist outside of the things that are happening, which is sometimes very hard to remember. So I would sort of add that one in there as well.
All right, so this might be kind of two separate questions, but I'm gonna loop them into one. So part one is, how have you found a sense of community and connection despite COVID-19 restrictions? Any resources, platforms, groups, things like that you would recommend? And then part two is, as restrictions end, what advice do you have for those looking to make those same connections and find other members of the queer community?
That's a tough one. I'll jump in. I mean, it's a hard one to answer in part because I feel reluctant to say this is going to change sometime soon, you know, but I'm going to answer it in part with part of the last question about mental health. And I think that ties together with community, you know, and I just want to put this out there as something we haven't mentioned. Something that has happened to a lot of people in the pandemic is that they have developed a problem with drugs or alcohol. And that is something that's very common in all of our communities. Where LGBTQ people are much more likely to abuse drugs or alcohol than or smoke than people in the general community. I can't remember a number off the top of my head, but I know it's at least twice as frequent among us. You know, and I kind of developed a drinking problem myself during the pandemic, and it was in part a response to being home all the time and being isolated. You know, working harder than before, but not having the real in-person contact with the people that I worked with my coworkers, with clients. And I discovered it was a problem, you know, somewhere last summer. And I said, oh, I have to do something about this. And community was actually one way out of that. And, you know, and I did join AA for probably about 4 or 5 months. And then I've moved to harm reduction with myself. And I think that's been very successful. But if people are, for example, finding that they've been using a substance and depending on a substance to get through this, that community is a really wonderful way out of that. And there's a lot of online community. One amazing thing that's come out of the pandemic in terms of community for people around behavioral health, so substance use or mental health, is that LGBT specific resources are now available universally. All you have to do is log on. You can join a group, for example, that might be available in the city and meet people that way as well, and then move towards meeting some of them a little bit later on. There are groups in the Hudson Valley. But to answer your question in a more specific way to what you were saying, to the question, I think that now is the time to plan. What is the summer going to look like, and who do I need to reconnect with? I think we've all had this experience of a kind of a washing out of our social network, that you know, there have been core people that we've kept in touch with if we're lucky, but there have been a lot of people who we've lost touch with, and now's the time to connect with them virtually again. Maybe do a little bit of reckoning. Who do I want to keep? Who do I really miss? And seek them out and make plans for the summer. How am I actually going to see these people in person? How am I going to not only just see these individual people, but bring groups of people together? So community.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I've really missed is, at least professionally and personally, is conferences, and particularly in person. I mean, some of them have happened online, but it's not the same. However, there's one really big free conference that I'm putting in the chat, which is the Philadelphia Trans Wellness Conference, which obviously happens usually in Philadelphia, but now people can go globally. When it's in person, it's about 6,000 people. So I can only imagine how big it's going to be. And for anybody who's trans or non-binary, it's one of the only places where you're in the majority, right? And in such a large space. And so I think online they'll probably do a very good job. They put on a really great conference. And also, this is just an artist that I've learned about who also does a lot of community connecting. Wednesday Holmes, she's a student of mine, told me about her recently. And so her work is a lot about mental health and also connecting folks and you know, finding connection within communities. So I think that's really important. And then I think in terms of the summer, also like getting outside to find community, but also going to protest, I think is a really good way to meet other trans and queer folks who are like-minded, and make something happen, because there's a lot to be happening right now.
I think also, I feel free to judge me here, but for those like folks who are more around like the college age and on the younger side, honestly, I found TikTok to be super helpful. And if you're not familiar with it, it's like a social media video platform, and like the videos that you interact with, you get more similar ones. So then you finally get like a curated page with all your similar interests. But throughout like lockdown and quarantine, I've really seen a lot of, like people just like come together over that, or like meet people who they didn't even know, like shared this very specific part of like their identity or like intersectionality as well. And from that, like they all recognized a need in this younger like LGBTQ space that, they wanted to form this community. And so some creators would actually say like, okay, I'm making a Zoom link for Friday at 5. Those who want to join, it's open. It's only open to LGBTQ plus members. Like, come, we'll have fun, and things like that. And so I thought that was really like awesome to kind of come from that, where like people just recognize like, let's just meet from all over the world, like kind of in our terms kind of thing. But also I'm also seeing, people using like dating apps to meet people from like the community. Like I know like Bumble has like a BFF option, or like I'd see a lot of people with like things of like, I need more like friends from the community, kind of like on their bio, so to speak. So like that was also another way that people met virtually, which is also a great screening tool for the summer. You meet, you talk a little bit, maybe you have like a Zoom meeting or something, and then you decide that it's like safe to meet like over the summer, depending on what your comfort levels are, and that could be a great way to meet people more on an individual basis as well.
Just to add, for me, I went in like several different directions. Like a part of me wanted to reconnect with old friends, and then a part of me was like, no, I don't want to really be around anyone. I really want to focus on myself. And then there was a part of me that was really anxious about connecting with other people socially, not in the sense of like getting sick, but more so it felt like I forgot how to socialize. And I still kind of feel like that. Like I don't know how to be in a group of like in a room full of people anymore. And the hard part about that is that I was in a really toxic relationship a year prior to COVID, where I genuinely was cut off from every single friend I ever had. It was real bad. So it was like, I finally had gotten out of that, had spent a year being with friends and reconnecting. And then COVID happened, and it was like, it was just kind of triggering in the sense of like, now I cannot socialize anymore. And it's been quite a conundrum.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing that. I think those are some wonderful ideas, resources, thoughts, comments, experiences. Before I ask any more questions, I just wanted to see if anyone else would like to ask anything. I know there's been nothing in the chat that I haven't already asked out loud, but did anyone who's in person have a burning question that they wanted to ask of any of our panelists before? We probably have time for one or two more questions. All right, well, I have multiple more questions that I can go through. So if you think of something, don't be afraid to raise your hand. Oh, okay, I have a hand raised. DM, go ahead. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, everybody. Great panel. Thank you for doing this. One's a comment and one's a question is that I think that it's important to also remember people that are suffering from like gambling challenges and eating disorders, because that's like a really big thing that people have discussed, that addictions, when you're talking about that. And the second question is, how do you all feel about, having your personal life and private life be more exposed now? Because before you were like more, you went to work, people didn't see your background, especially like the therapists. And then now people are able to see you in your homes, or you're seeing in their homes. And like, it's a different perspective. How has that been for all of you?
Well, I mean, with some folks, like I have this one patient who, would describe this very particular relationship with their cat. And I was like, oh yeah, people like their cats, right? But seeing this cat interact with this person, it's like no cat I've ever seen before. And so like things like that have been really great about seeing into people's homes. And you know, I mean, it's been hard because people also sometimes don't have as much privacy, so we're not getting to talk about stuff. And then people seeing my home, you know, they're all, you know, usually pretty curious. And but actually in the beginning it was more people maybe want to know where I was just to know if I was safe. Like in the beginning I was doing a lot of reassuring that like I was healthy, I was okay. And once people then knew that like I was okay, we sort of went back to business as usual. Yeah.
I think for me, it's been empowering in a weird way because I was kind of the mindset prior to all of this that there is, you know, professional me, and that has to behave a certain way and have the certain wall up, and I can't express any individuality in some ways. And then there's personal me, who's completely different. So when my students or, you know, my staff that I have meetings with, you know, I get to kind of share with them a little slice of my life. Or like through that, we made conversations like you know, I used to sit somewhere else in my apartment and that was like covered like wall to wall with plants. So they'd be like, what are those? And so we had to kind of, we could share a little bit of that, but it also taught me that I'm allowed to be fully who I am in all the spaces that I inhabit, and that it's not unprofessional of me to be like more myself. And in some cases like that has been like great for students to see, like someone who might share similar identities to them in a more, you know, professional space, and like for them to know that it's okay for them to also be who they are. They don't need to lose their individuality when they enter the workforce specifically. So for me, it's been kind of cool also because I don't need to separate my work and life. Like I am me all the time. So
I definitely had not a great time. I was going to class. I had class online, and it was really hard because in my last apartment, I genuinely only had my bedroom, and my fiance had moved in with me during quarantine. And it was very stressful because I'd be sitting at my desk, and then she would need to get up and leave the room, and you know, she'd walk past, and I don't know what about it stressed me out. I think it was the opposite. And it was just, I didn't want people to see my private space. You know, I take a lot of, you know, my room is my safe space, you know, and I felt like all these people had a very intimate view of my life, you know, and they would see my fiance walk past, and it was just very, very stressful for me. Now I'm in a different apartment and I'm able to like turn a table around and like, have something behind me. But it really gave me a lot of anxiety, and to the point where for some period of time, I couldn't handle, like if my laptop was up and my camera, like I can see my camera thing, I had to cover it, you know, because I felt like somebody was always watching me, and it actually contributed to some paranoia that I started to develop. You know, luckily, you know, I started seeing my therapist again, and like I'm able to get that under control. But it was very scary. I just felt like people were always watching me. And I really can't wait to just be back in person and talking to people face to face, because you also don't have there's no body language, like no nonverbal cues when everybody's muted. And it's I don't know, it just stresses me out a little bit.
Mm-hmm. I had a couple of thoughts. One of them is that my dog has somehow managed to try to meet all of my clients, and my coworkers, and despite my best efforts, and sometimes that's actually been helpful for a client to see that I have this dog that he's kind of special, and and sometimes he's only a dog that his owner could love. And I think it's been good for some of my clients to see some of the things that I've had to go to take care of that he's done. I try not to have him interrupt us too much. And then also, I think the other way around, some interesting things have happened. A lot of people have been very isolated. And I had one client that moved. I'm not going to tell you a lot about this person's story, but she moved and she was alone, and that nobody had been in her new apartment. She was there for months by herself. And really, I was the only visitor in her apartment. And she took me for a tour. She picked up her phone and took me around and showed me the furniture that she set up and talked about what she did, various times a day, in this place and that place, and how she'd made it home for herself. And it was interesting because, we would have seen each other in an office and never had this kind of conversation about, what her home meant to her and we wouldn't have been able to kind of dispel the loneliness I think that she was feeling being there by herself. So it's provided some unique moments.
Great, thank you. I'm going to do one final question to finish it out unless someone else has one. And this is just kind of like a big, broad question. What hopes do you have for either your local LGBTQ community or the community at large, either in the short term or the long term? Just kind of hopes, dreams, what you'd like to see.
I'm definitely going to jump in on this one. So as Frezia, again, I love TikTok. I was very resistant at first, and then I was like, I'm going to download TikTok. And the one thing that I have truly noticed that it just lifts my spirits is the amount of mutual aid. Like, it has been insane. People my age raising money to just randomly give to people. And like there was this one person doing something called the Venmo challenge, and I feel really bad for her. I really hope that she didn't have to pay taxes on it, but people would send her money, and she went to this one restaurant, like a pancake house or something, and handed each of the people working there that day $1,000. And it was just like, to see something like that, it was just so inspiring, because COVID really showed how easily and that any of us could go and die. And it really just made us very sensitive to our own humanity. And I hope that that is something that doesn't go away. I think it's so important for all of us to care about the person next to one another. If you have 2 sandwiches and you can give one away, give that sandwich away. Me personally, I was driving for Grubhub, and I started carrying food in my car, like extra food in my car, because the amount of people I would see on the street just asking for anything. And a lot of them my age. And I can imagine some of them being a part of the LGBTQ community. And I just hope that that mutual aid continues. And I hope that when people see another person on the street, their first assumption or their first thought isn't, why don't they get a job? And I really hope that it continues, and I hope that it strengthens, because we all really deserve human rights, especially when I think about LGBTQ people and how a lot of trans women aren't allowed in certain shelters, and just how hard it is to be a trans person and get through all of this, so yeah, I'm really passionate about just helping one another and mutual aid. And that's the one thing I've seen that has been really positive, that I feel like could really make a difference in not only just the community, but the world.
I think along kind of the same lines, just to piggyback off that, I hope that, we as a community broadly can realize how much intersectionality truly matters, especially in light of all the social justice movements and all the horrible things that have been happening in the world. And just because we're a part of the LGBTQ plus community doesn't mean, that our work kind of stops there, or that, we don't have other privileges elsewhere, and where do those intersect? And I hope that, all of us can continue or start in some cases like that work to kind of educate ourselves, decolonize our mind, and unlearn harmful behaviors, so that we can continue to provide that mutual aid to each other and be a source of support. And then on the other hand, on a more light-sided note, I really hope to see more like LGBTQ plus spaces like pop up, because I've been hearing that. I know that there's a need for those, but I just want like a gay bookstore or a coffee shop and like somewhere where we can all just hang out. So if anyone wants to start a business venture, let's make it happen.
I guess like one hope that I would have for the community would be in specifically to sort of help and galvanize around supporting trans kids and like trans adults and our queer comrades, because of how much anti-trans legislation is happening and that it's becoming a felony to support and treat kids in more than half of the states. So, I think, at some point we may be starting an underground railroad to New York from Arkansas and Texas and other places like that, because parents will lose their children and physicians will lose their licenses in those places. So I'm hoping that we can, all fight together for the most vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. The word that comes to mind for me in terms of my hope for the community is intentionality. We've had to essentially fight to be a community during the whole pandemic, and that I hope that people will take that in intentional sense of community with them afterwards and not take our community for granted. And in terms of connectedness, I would love to see younger folks and older folks connecting a lot more. And I think this technology that we've gotten so fluent with during the pandemic really could make that a lot more possible. There's always been the internet, but that's been kind of anonymous. And now the internet is as personal as looking right into, 7 other people's kitchens and bedrooms, etc. So I would love to see if our community can take that kind of remote connection and make something a lot more intentional, and that we hold on to it after things open up again.
Thank you so much, everyone. I am going to wrap up, but if anyone who's on is interested in continuing the conversation more informally, I'm going to leave the Zoom open for a little while if you just want to chat with each other. The recording will be off and everything. But first, I just want to thank our panelists, John, Frezia, SJ, and James. Thank you so much for coming tonight, sharing your time, your experiences. I also want to thank Amanda Norton and the Hudson Valley LGBTQ Center for co-hosting this event alongside Marist. And then obviously thank you all for coming today.